Praise, praise to the one who's always loving you. Praise, praise to the one who adores you. Oh, praise, praise to the one who's always watching over you.
Court is now in session. Counsel, you may proceed.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Today I want to talk to you about something that's kind of difficult. I want to talk to you about the subject of suffering. You know, religious spirits love to beat up on God's people. If a religious spirit can get us to agree with a lie or even a distortion of the truth, it now claims that we have given it authority. We empower it by our agreement. Twisted truths about suffering have allowed enormous pain. We must have wisdom on the subject of suffering. And understand this, our primary mission is not to agree with or live in suffering, but rather to end it. A religious spirit in the world system wants us to agree with suffering so it can torture us. Many have unwittingly gone along with this and even thought it was God. You know, Paul talks about this in 2 Corinthians 11. Did you know sarcasm is in the Bible? Listen to the sarcasm in Paul's words as he speaks on the subject of wrong agreements. This is 2 Corinthians 11:17. What I speak not according to the Lord, but as it were, foolishly, in this confidence of boasting. Do you hear the sarcasm? Seeing that many boast according to the flesh, I will also boast. For you put up with fools gladly, since you yourselves are wise. You put up with it if one brings you into bondage, if one devours you, if one takes from you, if one exalts himself, if one strikes you on the face. To our shame, I say that we were too weak for that. Wow. You see, agreement attracts a religious spirit that will pile it on. Many Christians focus on suffering, almost as if it were the point of Christianity. Suffering is never our focus. Rather, it's what we're here to end. We seek first the kingdom, heaven on earth. We cannot seek first the kingdom when we're focused on suffering. There's no suffering in heaven. Suffering is primarily caused by a lack of relationship with God. Remember when Jesus said in Matthew 27:46, my God, why have you forsaken me? Even on the cross, Jesus was not primarily suffering from nails, but from separation. The solution to all suffering is relationship with God. Heaven is His presence. And as His presence grows in our lives, it changes our circumstances and eventually the world until there is no more suffering.
Objection, Your Honor. All Christians must suffer and endure tribulation. Even Jesus said in John 16:33, in the world you will have tribulation.
Your Honor, I want to thank Counsel Gillivray for pointing out an important verse. But as usual, he's missed the point. The full verse says, these things I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation. But be of good cheer, I have overcome the world. Jesus was pointing out the two systems, and he was making it clear that in the world system, we do have tribulation. But in heaven's system, we have peace. And heaven's system has overcome the world.
Objection overruled.
Thank you, Your Honor. You know, certainly suffering is mentioned in the Bible. And we're going to look briefly at several types of suffering. First, let's eliminate a few that would seem obvious we're not to agree with. Certainly not sickness, not disease, not poverty, not shame, not rejection, and that's neither from God nor others. Not unworthiness, not self-loathing, not grief or sorrow or regret. You know, it amazes me that many Christians actually think God brings or even allows some of these sort of things. But Isaiah was prophesying the mission of Jesus in chapter 53, verse 4, which says, "Surely he has borne our griefs and our sorrows, and by his stripes we are healed." So Jesus came to get rid of these things. And if Jesus paid for our healing on the cross with his stripes, would God turn around and say, "But you need this sickness right now"? Would Jesus heal people and say, "The kingdom of God has come near to you"? I mean, the kingdom of God is heaven. Does God use suffering in his kingdom? Let's move on to 3 other types of suffering that we might face until heaven is fully manifested on earth. And whenever you read a Bible verse about suffering, consider whether it fits into one of these categories. Category 1, coming out of the world system. Now, we've established in this study that Satan's way of thinking, which is represented by the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and the idea of toil, we're calling it the world system. You know, God never intended the world system. It came about because we came into agreement with Satan when we gave away our authority in the garden. But now the world system is here. We're born into it. We're raised on it, believing its lies. And we have to come out of it if we're going to enter the kingdom. The process of weaning ourselves from what we thought was our only source of fulfillment can be painful. There are very many verses on this type of suffering, and it's why Acts 14:22 says we must, through many tribulations, enter the kingdom of God. For example, if my heart's attached to money, which is just one example of a lure in the world system, letting go of it can be painful. And until I give up my love of money and my belief that it's my fulfillment, my experience of the kingdom is going to be limited. Another example could be a relationship that we thought would be our fulfillment and the broken heart that follows. Coming to the realization that the world system will not fulfill me is what I like to call falling out of the world tree. It hurts. But it brings an opportunity to get into heaven's system. At the very moment that I'm experiencing the pain, there's an opportunity to ask God to be my fulfillment and to take away the pain. It's in these moments that our relationship with him becomes real. And once I'm in heaven's system, which is the kingdom, I've left that type of suffering behind. Category 2, rejection by the world system. The second category of suffering is our being rejected by the world system. It's when we come out of the world, and it only makes sense that the world system and I are now enemies, and it will demonstrate its hatred. It did the same to Jesus. In John 15:18, Jesus said, "If the world hates you, know that it hated me before it hated you." Many of you know what it feels like to be subjected to rejection and even abuse because of Christ. But this type of suffering is in decline. It reached its peak during the 70-year period between the cross and the destruction of the temple. But the ability of the world system to persecute God's children grows weaker. And as the kingdom covers the earth, it grows weaker still. We may still encounter this type of suffering until Satan and his world system are gone. But we never agree with it. In fact, we must break agreement with the negative thought pattern that suffering is on the increase and that the future holds more and more suffering for Christians. It is this belief that empowers the enemy to subject you to this type of suffering. Yet, regardless of what you believe, you can be sure that God's heart is near to those who encounter this type of suffering. And there's a supernatural grace that shows up to comfort those who are going through it. 1 Peter 4:13 says, "But rejoice to the extent that you partake of Christ's sufferings, that when his glory is revealed, you may also be glad with exceeding joy. If you are reproached for the name of Christ, blessed are you, for the Spirit of glory and of God rests upon you. Know this, when we suffer rejection from the world system due to our relationship with God, He is near to bring instant comfort. Category 3, which is called sharing His heart for His lost family. This is the only type of suffering that we're to agree with. 1 Corinthians 13:4 says, love suffers long and is kind. Love suffers long and is kind. God is passionate about relationship. And when He loves, He's all in. Have you ever loved someone so much that it hurt? For God so loved the world that He gave His only Son. Imagine the position God was in. He loved His Son and He loved humanity. He must have suffered great agony in arriving at the decision to let His Son endure the cross. But it was the price He was willing to pay to restore relationship with you and me. When He lives in us, we will begin to feel His love for others and the crazy passion to unite them with relationship to the Father. This kind of suffering empowers us, like it says in Philippians 3:10, that I may know Him and the power of His resurrection and the fellowship of His sufferings. Here's the main thing we need to understand. Separation from God is suffering. People have suffered a great deal on this planet. But yet it does not compare to what they will experience forever without Christ. The definition of hell might be eternal separation from His presence with no hope of return. On the other hand, heaven is His presence. Until the kingdom is fully manifested on earth, there will be suffering, and some people will not be healed, not because they lacked faith, but rather because the kingdom has not yet been fully manifested. But even now, once we're out of the cycle of drama and trauma and into heaven's cycle of glory to glory, we will experience heaven to a greater and greater degree in our lives. And as we grow in relationship with Him, and we find that our deepest needs are met in Him, we are fulfilled. And there's no more suffering personally. And as His presence fills the earth, there will be no more suffering, period. Let's partner with God to end all suffering.